This is Rennes-le-Château. It's a very small French town, but it's the centre of a very large mystery. I first came here 20 years ago on a family holiday and I've been fascinated by this mystery ever since. It all seems to hinge around one Bérenger Saunière, who was the priest here about 100 years ago. He found something in his church, and as a result of that he became immensely rich. But nobody knows quite what he found or where the money came from. What he did in his lifetime and the clues that he left behind have inspired researchers to conclude that maybe Jesus is buried somewhere beneath us now, or that these hills are stuffed with fabulous treasure. Some say that the evidence points to Jesus having married and fathered a family. Then came the Vinci Code, which has once again thrown Rennes-le-Château into the spotlight. This village isn't actually a location in the novel or the film, but the idea that Jesus was married and fathered children is central to Dan Brown's story. And where did he get that theory from? Books about Rennes-le-Château, of course. The first character to appear in Dan Brown's novel is called Saunière, the same name as the 19th century priest of that village. People have come up with all sorts of theories about the source of Saunière's wealth. The idea that Saunière found evidence of a holy bloodline is essentially the theory that Dan Brown weaves into his book. But this is just one of many theories. The things that have been written about Rennes-le-Château are contradictory, so when you read all the books, you just get confused. I'd been to Rennes a couple of times before, but only on short visits. I wanted to come back again and really look at all the clues firsthand, to see what Saunière had done, to look at all the evidence, and then to see if all the mainstream theories that I'd read about actually made sense to me, and maybe even to see if I could come up with some original theories of my own. Bérenger Saunière was born in 1852 here in Montazelle in the French Pyrenees. This ordinary baby would grow up to leave a legacy that would shock the world for over a century. Saunière seemed destined for greatness within the church, to become perhaps the priest of a major parish, but at the age of 33 he was sent up this path to Rennes-le-Château. Some writers have speculated that the posting to this remote hilltop, just a couple of miles from his birthplace, was a form of punishment for some indiscretion. Perhaps he'd been caught breaking his vow of chastity. Given his subsequent actions, this wouldn't be surprising. It must have seemed a backward step for the ambitious priest. Rennes-le-Château in 1885 was a dry, stony village with no proper access road and no running water. The church was already 1,000 years old and in a dangerously neglected condition, and the adjacent priest's house was uninhabitable. But with a donation from a countess and a loan from the local council, Saunière began the improvements to the church that would change his life. For hidden within the church and uncovered during the renovation work were some parchments containing coded messages. Saunière brought his mysterious parchments on horseback here to Carcassonne, where he showed them to the Bishop Bial. Normally such documents would be passed up the line within the church structure, and the priest who had found them would never see them again, but for some reason Bishop Billard paid for Saunière to take them all the way to Paris. The bishop also introduced Saunière to leading members of Parisian high society, and within weeks this humble priest was dating Emma Calvé, who was probably one of the biggest singing stars of her day. It's like, say, the bloke from your local post office who's never had a girlfriend and still lives with his mum, suddenly dating Britney Spears. Now, what was it about Saunière that made him so attractive to Parisian women? Was it his looks? Was it his charisma? Or was it the large scroll that he kept hidden in his tunic? Actually, his timing was the key. At this time, an embryonic Christian movement was developing called the Modernists. At the start of the 1890s, the Pope was tolerant of priests who sought to reinvent Christianity, following new discoveries in history and science and archaeology, discoveries that proved elements of the Bible to be wrong. Saunière's arrival in Paris in 1891 coincided with the final year of openness at Saint-Sulpice, enabling him to study his parchments with liberal-minded scholars. In 1892, the Pope began the suppression of the Modernists, but it was too late to stop Saunière. He returned to Rennes-le-Château a very rich man, and he began a spending spree that would last the rest of his life. He built a water tower to provide sanitation for the villagers. He bought land next to the church and built this luxury villa to provide accommodation for his high society friends. He built a tower as his personal library and linked it via a walkway to another tower with a glass conservatory. He also built an orangery, and he paid for the construction of a proper road up to the village. And so he lived a life of luxury in this village that had known only poverty, sharing his wealth and the knowledge of his secret only with his housekeeper, Marie. When the Bishop of Carcassonne died, his replacement was very suspicious as to the source of Saunière's wealth. He summoned Saunière here to Carcassonne and demanded to know, where has all this money come from? Saunière said nothing. He was arrogant, he was confident, and so the bishop was forced to set up an inquiry. But they couldn't find anything. Saunière had put all his wealth into his housekeeper's name, and so they came up with a charge of illegally selling masses, and Saunière was briefly banished, but soon after then a new pope came in and he was reinstated. Saunière died in 1917, leaving all his property to his housekeeper, Marie. Although she was often heard saying, "The people here are walking on gold without knowing it," she took her secret with her to the grave. On her death in 1953, the solution to the mystery of Rennes-le-Château seemed buried forever, and that's when the treasure hunters moved in. So that is the story of the enigmatic Bérenger Saunière, and that's why I'm here. I want to get to the bottom of this mystery. Many people thought Saunière had simply found a treasure map and that somewhere in the hills around the village was a stash of riches.
So the mystery was, what treasure did he find? He must have found a treasure. That was the original story and that was the original mystery that I set out to solve.
Had Saunière stumbled across the treasures of the Knights Templar? When the Knights Templar were rounded up and executed in the 13th century, the only members to escape capture were those based near Rennes-le-Château, and the organisation's enormous wealth was never found. Other treasures are believed to be stashed in the region as well, such as the Visigoths. So many people came here to dig that this sign had to be erected. Digging is, as we all know now, illegal in Rennes-le-Château, but everybody seems to be at it. It seems to be an open secret that if you live there, if you own a house there, you're digging. And I have these visions of it being like The Great Escape and people pulling away their sofas in their living room and there's this dark pit beneath it. Have you actually seen any of these and have you been inside any of them?
Yeah. But they don't get anywhere. Most of them were dug by Henri Butillon, who owned the hotel-restaurant when I first found the place. And he was obsessed by the treasure, poor man, and dug all over the domain.
The whole hill is actually a honeycomb of caves anyway, because it's a limestone hill, natural caves and cavities, added to all these excavations that have been going on for all these years. Well, say one day I think the village is actually going to disappear into a big black hole.
And there's actually a lake, or it is said there is a lake under the village, which is very romantic. Actually under the chateau of Rennes-le-Chateau.
So if there is a cave full of gold, where is it? Did Saunière leave us any clues? Well, Saunière must have had an awful lot of time on his hands, because he seems to have spent about half his life creating clues that would mystify and perplex historians, the researchers and the punters for the next 100 years. Take this stone grotto, for instance, in the grounds of the church. It's a replica of the one that Saunière built using stones that he carried up to the village from the little river in the valley below. Why would a rich man like Saunière build it himself? This is the most direct path down to the nearest river to Rennes-le-Château. This is where Saunière would have come when he was collecting the pebbles and stones that he used to build his grotto. Now it's been a horrible journey. I'm scratched and bleeding. It's taken over half an hour through very, very difficult overgrown terrain. Perhaps it was clearer in his day, but it's certainly not an easy journey. And why would anyone want to bring rocks back from this kind of distance when it's such a difficult, steep, arduous pathway? Maybe the answer lies in the kind of stones that Saunière was bringing back, because there is a theory that states that the chateau at Rennes-le-Château was used to create false boulders which contained gold nuggets. They were wrapped in clay and baked so they looked like real stones, and then they were laid in the river and hidden there so that a casual observer wouldn't realise that they weren't real stones. But somebody who knew what they were looking for, like Saunière, would know what they were. So possibly Saunière came down here with a rucksack and he filled it with these stones and brought them back to his church, where he would have smashed them open. And if he found gold nuggets in them, then obviously that explains where his money came from. But the ones that were real stones, he just used to build his grotto, and that covered up his actions, and that explained, why he was doing that. I think that one was a real stone, sadly.
Well, certainly there are stories that he did, hump up several bags full of stones mysteriously from down in the valley, and he built this grotto outside the church. But it wouldn't really account for all the mysteries surrounding his wealth. He got amazingly wealthy and never moved from the village. He just stayed there. Maybe he was guarding his supply, of course, but on the other hand, there was something specific about the village, and other people travelled long distances to see him at the village.
There does seem to be something significant about that watercourse where Saunière did pick those rocks up from, because he did actually own that piece of land. It's one thing he specifically bought up. Never actually find out why.
Well, I suppose it could account for Mariano saying that the villagers were walking on gold.
Then there's the interior of his church. As an exercise in vulgar overstatement, this interior design job is second to none. But close inspection of the carvings, paintings and inscriptions reveals curious anomalies. Take the entrance.
Over the porch to the church, it is in Latin, "This is a terrible place." But actually, more accurately, it should be translated, "Your place is terrible." Terrible perhaps in the sense of awesome.
When you first see the inside of that church, it's an amazing phantasmagoric sort of nightmare world sliding into bad taste. It reflects Saunière's character, I think. But anyway, yes, he put all sorts of curious indications.
What about the devil crouching as if on an invisible chair just inside the door? A devil without a chair? We'll investigate these later.
Virtually everything, every inscription that Saunière had put in the church, every statue, has something slightly odd about it. Every anomaly in the church, individually you could explain, but the cumulative effect. One French expert on church decoration has actually counted sort of 90 anomalies in there, each one explainable by a mistake, a mistranslation, people may be reading too much into it, but 90 of them added together, you may think, no, he's done it for a reason, either to tell us something or to prevent us finding something. The one thing you can say for sure is that something odd was going on in that village to do with that priest.
You have the devil supporting the holy water, and above you have the four angels who are making the sign of the cross. Each one makes a different element of the sign of the cross. It's not until you notice the little decorative beasties in between. They seem to be purely bits of decoration. I remember we were filming Sauniere's grave one day and it suddenly clicked in my head, and I remember saying, look, those little decorative beasties are salamanders, and if they're salamanders, then what we have is the devil, who is Rex Mundi, Lord of the Earth. He is supporting the holy water. Above the water are the salamanders, and they are creatures of fire. And above them we have the angels, who are pure spirit or air. And so you have the four elements: earth, water, fire, air. What was a 20th century priest doing, putting alchemical imagery into his church? Extraordinary.
There are other churches that do have sort of demon statues connected with the holy water stoup, but it is sort of quite unusual. Also, the inscription is in French. In this sign you will conquer. And there are some angels sort of making the sign of the cross. So it appears to be sort of quite a straightforward interpretation, except that the inscription's actually wrong. It's actually, in this sign you will conquer it, or conquer him. So you often find things, you can explain them, but there's often sort of slightly odd touches that make you think something else was going on in Sauniere's mind.
Station 14 of the Stations of the Cross, where he puts a full moon into the night sky, which is supposed to be the scene of Jesus being laid into the tomb. The Gospels make it quite clear that it had to happen before nightfall, and yet Sauniere gives us a full moon. It was not a mistake. He knew the Gospels better than I do. So what's he trying to say? That the Gospels have got it wrong, or that this is later, and so it isn't Jesus being carried in, but Jesus being carried out again.
The Stations of the Cross, which you find in any Catholic church, actually run in the reverse direction to what they normally do. Again, not absolutely unique, but still unusual. There are odd little touches in the Stations of the Cross, figures that appear to be making meaningful actions that don't really have anything to do with the action.
The other one that's interesting and is immediately in front of you, and not many people seem to notice, that if you look towards the altar, you see you have on either side Mary and Joseph, and each of them is carrying a baby Jesus. There are two baby Jesuses. Now, is Sauniere giving us a hint of that heresy which claimed that Jesus had a twin? There was, in the early days of the church, a belief that Jesus had a twin. Then, of course, there's that great mammoth statuary group, Christ Succors the Afflicted. Always, it seems, if Sauniere wants you to notice something, he gives you a little nudge. And, of course, the obvious thing that he hints at, in the foreground of this flowery landscape, it's a money bag, burst open. And underneath you have an inscription. Venez à moi, vous tous qui souffrez et qui êtes accablés, et je vous soulagerai. Come unto me, all ye who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He's changed the word from affligé to accablé. It means exactly the same. But as soon as you notice that the first two letters of accablé are slightly smaller, and then you see that there is a faint white line, and so he's linked up sac à blé, which is bag of corn, and corn is a slang word for treasure, money, dough.
So also in the church, Sauniere has had laid some black and white tiles.
Yes, and if you look at the way the tiles have been cut, he defines an 8 by 8 square, so you're looking at a chessboard. We don't know what he meant or why he wanted to put a chessboard there. Certainly You use the chessboard in the decipherment of the major cipher, the secret message which speaks of shepherdess, no temptation, Poussin Tenier, hold the key.
Just like the Da Vinci Code, the Mystery of Rennes-le-Chateau involves coded messages in works of art. Poussin's painting Les Bergers d'Arcadie apparently shows a tomb that used to exist close to Rennes. It's not there anymore because so many treasure hunters came poking around it that the frustrated landowner blew it up. Now only the base remains. If you look closely at the painting, the hills in the background align very closely with the hills behind the site of the real tomb, showing Cardoux, Blanchefort and Rennes itself. The coded message in one of the parchments Saunière is said to have found reads, "Shepherdess, no temptation, Poussin Tenier, hold the key." Well, in this painting we have a shepherdess, and it's by Poussin. Is that the key to the mystery? Henry Lincoln has written about how the geometry of this painting was based on pentagrams. He also discovered that the entire region around Rennes-le-Château contains pentagrams on a massive scale, involving ancient buildings spaced at precise distances over mountainous terrain. These buildings involve the castle at Rennes-le-Château, at Bézout and at Blanchefort. Virtually every rocky outcrop and mountain in this area has a castle on it. Now, Saunière must have been aware of the significance of all these castles. This area had a very turbulent history, and there was always the need to bury your treasure from the marauding invaders. Many of the clues and images seem to point to the chateau at Blanchefort, so I decided to visit it for myself. I've just arrived at the Château de Blanchefort, and it's been a 2-hour hike. I'm absolutely knackered, and this is all there seems to be. There's no evidence of a real chateau. This is just rock. So I'm going to climb up. There's something that's been carved out up here, and I'm going to have a look, see what's there. A couple of candles have been left here. Some people have been having some little religious ceremony by the looks of things. There's a cave that goes off through there, just big enough to crawl through, but it doesn't look as if it goes anywhere. And then up this way, there's another cave going up there, but again, I can't quite get up there, and it looks like it goes to a dead end, so not really sure. So why they call this a chateau, I don't really know. Somebody said that there was a chateau built up here overlooking Mount Cardoux, which is just to my left there, to guard the possible tomb of Christ, but that hardly seems very likely if there never really was a chateau here. And then of course there's the references in Saunière's church to the black and white in some of the Stations of the Cross, and there's Roc Negre just behind me, and this is Blanchefort. But what it all means, I've no idea, because it doesn't seem anything more than this little hollowed out area, which hardly constitutes a castle, if you ask me. Don't think I'll be moving in anyway. Before I go back, I'm going to have my emergency Mars bar rations. I'm knackered. Well, it looks like, having eaten my Mars bar, I'm going to have to eat my words, because there, just above me, if you can see on top of my finger, are some bricks, and it looks as if that is the only man-made structure that remains at the site of Château de Blanchefort. And I only found those because I was just leaving after about an hour, looking around the site, looking for some sign of human habitation other than that little cave that I found. And I just glanced back at it, and you can only see this from halfway along the path where it's just like a little gap through the trees, and the camera's swinging around a bit because I'm hanging it from a branch. This was too far to bring the heavy tripod, so I haven't got many sort of accessories with me, but you can just about see that little pile of bricks, and it's a bit too dangerous to climb up there because I reckon I could get up there, but I'm not sure I could get down again, and the only way off this hill if you break a leg is going to be by helicopter, and I just don't want that kind of embarrassment, quite frankly, although it might make a good documentary. Blanchefort didn't reveal its secrets to me. If it hid a stash of treasure, I'd need to try some serious digging and tree clearing to get at it. The next place I wanted to check out was the Devil's Armchair, an ancient stone that I'd heard about not far from Blanchefort, which seemed to be symbolically connected to the devil in Saunière's church. But first, I had to go on a balloon trip. Dave Smith, my balloon pilot, has lived in Rennes-le-Ban, a spa town within walking distance of Rennes-le-Château, for 10 years. So Dave, when we were ballooning over the area of Rennes-le-Château, you said something very interesting about how the ground had changed since Sauniere's time in terms of its forest covering.
Yeah, that's right. Population in the area was probably 10 times what it is then, what it is now. And the type of agriculture was very different. The main agricultural commodities were wool, chestnuts and pigs. Thereby the forest wasn't there.
So a lot of the bare rock would have been visible.
That's right.
Which you can't see now. So Saunière would have had access to a lot more bare rock than we can have.
Absolutely. He'd have had access to probably 10 times the area than we have.
So it's making the job for the treasure hunters a lot harder these days.
Yes, well, very difficult, especially as most treasure is turned up when fields are ploughed.
Have you seen anything from the air or met anyone that gives you a new insight into the Saunière
There are
mystery?
some very interesting features around here in natural rock and or traces of ruins.
Has anyone said anything to you that makes you sort of change your views? I mean, you came here because of the Rennes-le-Château mystery, didn't you?
Yeah, I was interested in the mystery. My views have changed. I've read a lot of the books. I've talked to a lot of people. A friend of mine's been doing research and he's just found a new reference to a treasure from prior to Sauniere's time, and this is the first reference I've heard of. There was always the suspicion that it was made up to cover his grave robbing or something along those lines. Yeah. But there is reference in a book from the 1850s to a treasure at Blanchefort guarded by a devil. Well, there's the devil armchair, but more interesting also is the devil in the church at Rennes-le-Château, as maybe another pointer to what Saunière found. It doesn't need to be one treasure with Saunière. It could be many treasures, and I'm sure there's lots of things to find here.
Just walked up a very steep hill from Rennes-les-Ban. I'm looking for the devil's armchair, le fauteuil du diable, which apparently is carved from a massive solid stone, possibly part of a set of standing stones which existed in pre-Christian times. And the significance of this armchair is that possibly it's connected with the devil in the church of Rennes-le-Château. Possibly it's connected also with the idea of Christ being in the mountain behind us on the other side of the valley. So hopefully we'll find it in a few minutes when we get up the top. Whew. I'm now about 300 feet above the valley of Rennes-les-Ban, which itself is about just 2 miles, I think, that way from Rennes-le-Château. And this is the Devil's Armchair. It's an amazing thing. It's about 4 feet wide. It probably weighs a ton. Obviously why no one's nicked it. Otherwise, you know what souvenir hunters are like. And it faces, that must be sort of southeast, across the valley. And it's now thickly wooded where it looks out over. And as Dave Smith was telling me earlier, this would have all been bare just 50 years ago or more, and certainly in Sauniere's time, the view from the Devil's Armchair would have been fantastic. But now it just sits here surrounded by thick forest. It's quite dark even though it's daylight, and I'm going to sit in the chair and just see what it feels like to be in this ancient throne. I mean, who knows, maybe that's what it was. Perhaps it was some kind of throne. It's just a magical feeling here. And just down there next to me is a spring which generates very iron-rich water, which stains the soil of sort of blood-red brown colour. and the whole thing down there is just tipping over the edge of the valley, a very sharp drop, a very brown stain on it. This is the view from the Devil's Armchair. I've put the camera in the stone seat itself, and as you can see, nothing but trees. And even if these trees were gone, on the other side of the valley, again, it's nothing but trees. But in Saunière's time and much, much earlier, you would have been able to see bare rock across the other side of the valley. And maybe there was something there, who knows, but it's certainly lost now, whatever it is. The answer to the mysterious source of Saunière's wealth doesn't have to be tied up with castles and treasure. There's natural wealth in the hills around Rennes-le-Château. I'm standing at the entrance of one of the ancient gold mines that exists around Rennes-le-Château. This one is very close to Rennes-le-Château. It's probably been abandoned now for about 2,000 years, and obviously there's no gold left in it. But it's possible that Saunière found a gold mine like this one, but one that still had gold in it, and of course one which no one else has found the entrance to. So that's definitely one of the theories which has some kind of validity. Things are really hotting up. I've just met an English guy who says he owns the 4 cottages next door to Saunière's church. Now, not only that, he's written 2 books on the subject. He tells me that Saunière has nothing to do with the mystery at all. He says there's lots of mysteries going on, but Saunière was totally irrelevant. Now, this is amazing stuff, and he's agreed to give me an interview later on, so fingers crossed for some interesting facts. So, Graham Simmons, you've lived in Rennes-le-Château now for about 15 years, and I understand you know perhaps more than anyone else here about the mystery of Rennes-le-Château.
I think that's probably true. It is the greatest mystery of this century, and perhaps fortunately not everybody knows that yet. It's a complex mystery. There are 10, perhaps 12 layers of history, and sadly people come for an hour, go in the church, hear about the priest Saunière, but he really doesn't matter very much. He was sent here, I think, originally, and he was quite a character. Now, there are legends about great treasures. I don't think it took the form that people think. Well, what does it matter? Now, I'd like to mention a little bit about the Templars. And what is fascinating was that they went, of course, to Jerusalem. Indeed, they built an abbey on the top. And they dug, according to my investigations, about 50,000 tons of material out. That hole is now called Stables of Solomon, under his Solomon, nevertheless. But whatever it was, they discovered something that told them that what matters was not so much Jerusalem, but in Rennes, or the neighbourhood of Rennes. And so they came and concentrated here. I think when they were persecuted by the French king, he never found their treasure. He thought he did. And I think we shall find that is not yet been found.
During our subsequent meetings, Graham told me that he felt he was on the verge of making a substantial Christian discovery. Now, at first he wouldn't tell me what he meant by that, but eventually he revealed that his lifetime of research had led him to the conclusion that Mary Magdalene is buried in a Templar tomb beneath Rennes-le-Château, together with documents and objects that would prove her identity. Graham also told me that the mayor of Rennes-le-Château was a retired soldier from very high up in the French army. Normally the mayor of a small village like this would be a local farmer, but this man was placed here by the French government so that they could keep an eye on developments. That explains why there was a military parade during my visit. Graham also said that Vatican spies also come here regularly. Clearly a lot of powerful people are concerned about what might be found. Graham died during the making of this documentary. His words, Saunière doesn't matter very much,
But he really doesn't matter very much.
have remained with me and have caused me to question the validity of the Saunière story.
The most popular version of the Rennes-le-Château mystery and the Saunière story, which is the one that's told in the first chapter of The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, ultimately derives from this collection of documents which have become known as the Dossier Secret, the secret files that were placed in the National Library in France in the 1960s. And that really tells the whole story of the connection between Rennes-le-Château and the supposed survival of the Merovingian bloodline. According to the Dossier Secret version of the story, Saunière took the parchments to Paris to get them decoded. Outside of those documents, there's no evidence at all that Saunière ever went to Paris. Although he was certainly absent for long periods of time travelling somewhere, so, why not Paris? But there's no specific evidence to place him there. The details in that story, we found a lot of them actually either can't be verified or are demonstrably wrong. For example, the key date in the Merovingian version is that all this is supposed to have been kicked off in the year 1891. That's when Saunière is supposed to have shifted the altar, and that's when he's found these parchments, and that's when his bishop sent him with the parchments to Paris to consult with this young priest who was an expert in languages and codes named Émile Offay. Now, when you actually go back to the original documents, which do survive, we actually know that the altar was replaced in 1887, 4 years earlier. Does that really matter? Well, it actually does, because if that discovery was made in 1887, then Émile Offay at that time was about 14 years old. In 1887, when we know that the altar was replaced, we do instantly know he definitely did find some documents or parchments inside that, because the villagers remembered this, and the villagers are recorded saying this long before the myth-making of the 1960s started. So that definitely happened in 1887, not 1891. Although he does seem to have thought that year was significant, and he discovered some kind of tomb in it, there was nothing to do with replacing the altar and finding the parchments.
And the tomb was certainly important and significant in some way, but Saunière wasn't going to commit his thoughts on it to his diary. All it read was, for that particular day, was discovered a tomb, it rained. Some elements that you expect to have been sort of bolted on, because they sound like fabrications, turn out to be pretty true. For example, it's often said that Saunière, as one of his many visitors to this strange little obscure village, to see him, quite clearly, was the great Parisian opera singer Emma Calvé, who actually had a home not so far away. And, it does sound like a fabrication just to make the whole thing sound much more exciting. Was she his lover? Well, we'll never know that, probably. But certainly the villagers were talking about her visits well before the sort of 1960s watershed in which things did start to be bolted on. And also was the fact that a Habsburg archduke used to go there quite regularly, presumably to see Saunière. Well, come on, it's just to add a bit of mystery and excitement to the story. But no, he went there. He went there several times. Nobody knows why. But he prevaricated about the reason. He said, I happened to be passing and got lost and found this interesting village. Come on.
If the basic story of Saunière's life, as it's told to us in the official village guidebook and in many other books, is of questionable accuracy, then it's even harder to make sense of the clues that he created. But that hasn't stopped hundreds of authors from having a go at trying to get to the bottom of things. Taken individually, each clue doesn't necessarily mean anything to anyone, but you can kind of combine them in a mix and match way to support a hypothesis. And that's what all these authors have done. This is a very small sample of the masses of books that have been written about Rennes-le-Château. So what are the main theories about the source of Saunière's cash, and how well do they stand up? One of the first theories to reach the mass market was published in 1982 in a book called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. This book suggested that all the mystery of Rennes-le-Château and the secret that Saunière had found pointed towards the fact that Jesus had got married and had fathered a family, and that his descendants were still alive in France today. Was Saunière paid by the Vatican to keep quiet about some kind of religious discovery that he'd made?
Wishful thinking. No evidence for it whatsoever.
It's not a very good way of persuading a priest to keep quiet, is it? To pay him so much money that he's going to have wild dinner parties and people from all over France are going to go there, and then he's going to get so drunk, presumably he can't, he can't shut up about anything.
Another theory suggests that perhaps the Ark of the Covenant is buried just 5 miles in that direction from Rennes-le-Château at a town called Arques.
Not as far as I know. If you wish to believe these things, hooray.
Some say that all the evidence points to the fact that Saunière must have found one of the mythical treasures that are supposed to be buried somewhere in the hills around us here.
There's no doubt that Saunière did find at least one small hoard of gold coins when he was renovating the church. Villagers were there when that happened and saw it and remembered it, and again reported that long before the myth-making started. One pot of gold coins isn't enough to explain his entire wealth.
And if he'd found, a huge treasure, the details would have leaked out by now. I mean, you couldn't keep something like that secret.
Behind me is Mount Cardew, and one of the theories says that Jesus is buried somewhere deep in the heart of that mountain.
What a load of hysterical rubbish. That's farcical.
It's an interesting theory, but there's no evidence for it whatsoever. And as far as one can tell, not even any local legends to support it. It's entirely modern.
Another theory states that the tomb of Mary Magdalene is located beneath Rennes-le-Château.
That's more going for that, considerably more going for that, one might say, than for the Jesus being buried around Rennes-le-Château theory, because there are many, in our view, quite persuasive legends to link her post-crucifixion with that area. But whether she's actually buried in that specific area, don't know.
It would be fascinating if someone was to find a tomb of somebody, but it would never be able to prove beyond doubt of who it was.
And by now there wouldn't be any DNA left. So, you know.
And who would you test it?
Exactly, exactly.
Pierre Plantin.
Oh no, we go around in circles.
The most bizarre interpretation of all the clues at Rennes-le-Château that I've heard is that perhaps there is a UFO buried in the field behind me.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it.
Well, I think we've wrapped that one up then, haven't we? Finally the truth comes out. I knew it was the aliens. That pretty much covers the mainstream theories that I've come across whilst researching the mystery of Rennes-le-Château. And it's a bit of a cliche, but it's true that the more I look, the more there is to see. It really is a multi-layered mystery. This remote beauty spot, a couple of miles upriver from Rennes-les-Bains, is called La Fontaine des Amours. It's here allegedly that Saunière and his lover Emma Calvé used to come for their romantic intertwinings. Now, Henry Lincoln, who was the first author to bring this subject to a worldwide attention, claims to have found some graffiti here about 30 years ago, which mentioned Emma Calvé's name and the date of her arrival here. And he says that when he came back a little bit later to film it, it had gone. It had been defaced by someone who was trying to scare him off the treasure trail. I've looked all over the area. Certainly there is graffiti dating back to the 19th century. I've seen some here. And there is graffiti everywhere where lovers have inscribed their initials and their names. So that brings me to some of my own theories which I've developed having spent some time in the village. The first one is Emma Calvé. I think she might have paid for everything. If she were having an affair with Saunière, she'd want to have a bit of luxury when she was down in his neck of the woods. So why not pay for a villa? Why not pay for the lovely gardens? And while we're at it, why not pay to have some running water installed so she could wash off the sweat from several days travelling? Saunière could then have concocted all those clues in the church using the spare change that was left over, just to throw everyone else off the scent.
No evidence for it whatsoever. Absolutely none.
It's a possibility. I mean, there's no particular evidence. Although it's true that villagers said that they'd seen Emma Calvé in Rennes-le-Château visiting Saunière long before any of the myth-making started. She was very wealthy, so she could have been giving him money, it's true, although she had her own chateau a day or so's journey away.
And Saunière himself said that he'd been receiving donations, plural, from different people, from people plural, you know, not one person. I mean, okay, he may have been covering his tracks, but I mean, he did actually say that, or rather write that in a letter which still exists. I mean, if she was giving him money, she wasn't the only one.
When Saunière said this, the implication of the language he used, these wealthy people that had been giving him money, all seemed to be female, because he did say they're people that had given him money without telling their husbands or families. So Emma Calvé could have been one of them. But again, why women? What did he have to offer? You know, apart from the scroll hidden in his...
Yes, beware his scroll, ladies. Yes.
The simplest theory is that Saunière must have found a crypt beneath his church, a crypt that contains the tombs and the coffins and the treasures of the whole Merovingian dynasty, which it is rumoured was buried here at Rennes-le-Château, and that's That's a massive, massive treasure, which is still there because no one has dug there since his day. They banned the digging in 1965. And although some ground-penetrating radar has suggested that there are 2 crypts beneath the church, no one has been in them since Sauniere's day.
Possible. That's all one can say.
The most interesting place, I think, to look underground is there is a crypt underneath the church in Rennes-le-Château. It's recorded in old documents that there was a crypt where the lords of Rennes were interred. It may solve the mystery if we could get into there. It may not, because it definitely exists. We know this from old records.
Another theory that I came up with from reading all the information is that perhaps Sauniere's wealth came from the descendants of the Merovingian dynasty, and that they paid him for proving that their lineage to the French throne is genuine. And that could be a vast sum of money, because that's obviously a very valuable thing. But that lineage is also, according to the records, is also the lineage of Christ, and therefore it's not a great jump to go from the fact that perhaps he found the crypt with the bodies in it from the Merovingian kings to saying that he's actually found evidence that the bloodline of Christ is still continuing.
Unlikely. Possible, but not that. That possibility is rather more complex. There could be a link with the Habsburgs, but not, I suspect, to prove this idea of somebody wanting to lay claim to the throne. That's nonsense. It's like somebody now in this country saying, I'm a descendant of Queen Boadicea, and I claim the throne. You know, this is nonsense. These are just silly ideas. There is certain fragmentary evidence that a Habsburg may have been involved on the edge of the story, but it's very tenuous.
The Habsburgs wouldn't have had any problem actually establishing a claim to the French throne anyway. There's certainly something about the papers and the archives of the Opal family, the last noble family to preside over the village before the French Revolution. There are references to documents they possessed that were very important, that had to be kept secret, that were in some way dangerous. We think one of the most plausible explanation for what Saunière was doing was that he was trying to find those missing archives because of whatever it was in them that made them important. And that his brother, Alfred, was also involved in a similar search.
Probably the most outlandish theory that I've come up with links the Mount Cardew body of Jesus theory with the geometrical shapes, the pentagons, the pentagrams theory. And that's because the geometry of the area must have been laid out in pre-Christian times, probably even pre-Roman times. And the precisely equidistant churches are on sites of standing stones or earlier places of worship. Thus, it will have been long known that the area has apparent magical or occult properties and powers. And could it be that when Jesus died, he was deliberately buried within this magical pentagon in order to give him the power to regenerate for a second coming? Perhaps he really is buried under the Poussin tomb or in the mountain of Cardew, and that is the reason.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, who knows? It's lunacy.
Did Saunière know anything about the sacred geometry of the area?
Interestingly, it seems, I haven't confirmed this yet, but it seems that the Tour Magdala is placed in a much more important position than is the church. One can ask why Saunière placed the Tour Magdala exactly where he did. We don't know what was there before, except, of course, we do know that it was on the corner of the original castle of Rennes-le-Château. These sites were marked, I think, in that period, so we're going back, we don't know where, to the time of the people who built Stonehenge or Karnak.
What was the source of Saunière's wealth?
The source of Saunière's wealth? Nobody knows. I can give you an explanation. We know that at that time people were playing with the mystic, the occult. If, for reasons of their own, these people, used to living in comfort, wanted to be able to visit this place. They didn't want to be living in peasant hovels. So they provided the money. That's as good an explanation as you'll get.
So the story you're saying is really that somebody with money provided the money, but we don't know. It could be any one of a number of candidates from the cast of thousands, as it is.
Yeah. There is nothing special about it. Saunière spent more money than he had any right to, and to a certain extent it has been established that he was fiddling about with saying masses and getting money coming in that he shouldn't have. It's all been vastly overrated.
Could he have said enough masses to have made that money?
Never. Of course not.
So when Tony Robinson puts it all down to the selling of illegal masses, that's definitely not true.
He can't possibly have made that amount of money from the illegal saying of masses. What Robinson said is totally wishful thinking based on very superficial research.
He certainly was selling masses. The documents survive showing that. Selling masses wasn't actually illegal as such. And we must remember that he was actually tried by the church courts on a charge of trafficking with masses and found not guilty. And it certainly doesn't account for his entire wealth. It can't do. That's why we feel the full explanation is partly the trafficking in masses, but also larger amounts from wealthier donors.
It must have been a hell of a traffic if he'd have got the equivalent of £2 million from saying masses for people. But why would, as we know for a fact, people living quite a distance away want this obscure priest from this obscure village to say masses for the souls of their dear departed or whoever? Why would they want that? Why couldn't they find somebody down the road, live down the road from them to do it? It'd be much easier. Certainly it's true that you could pay people, priests, renegade priests, to basically say masses that were essentially a magical act, a satanic act. That would be a reason for people to want a distant priest who they didn't know to say a mass for them. But actually, very few people take Saunière himself at his own words. Basically, he said that he got his money from private donations, but he refused to give the reason for this because it was hugely confidential. And the conduit for the money, the donations, was his own brother, Alfred. And again, people tend to totally ignore Alfred, but he was a key player in this story.
He was also an alcoholic, but died in 1905. It may be significant that it was in 1905 that Saunière began to basically run out of money, had problems paying the bills for the work on his domain hadn't yet finished. He was still building the Tour Magdala, but Alfred seems to be a key player, as important, if not more important, than Bérenger Saunière. But very few people pay much attention to him.
Hundreds of clues, dozens of theories. Where is the answer? I'm still no clearer than I was. Yes, Henry Lincoln told me that people gave Saunière money. Yes, Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince told me that people gave him money via his brother, and they all told me he was selling masses on the side. But they also said this doesn't explain the entire mystery, the clues, the enigma. If people gave him money, there must have been something special about this place, something that he found. I think if I'm going to be totally realistic about this, the most likely thing is surely got to be that Saunière found a crypt beneath his church full of Merovingian kings and their treasures, and he simply sold the lot. I think one day perhaps they will dig down there when the permission is granted. They will find a crypt and it's going to be empty apart from the skeletons. There'll be no treasures there at all. And in a way, that would be a sad thing, because although it will probably solve the mystery, it's like if you find the Loch Ness Monster, there's no mystery anymore, there's no mystique. And I think people need the mystery, they need that sense of mystery. And some people will never be satisfied anyway, no matter what you find there. They will always come up with other theories and greater and better things. So I think I would probably put my money on Saunière having found the treasure beneath the church itself, but I don't think it'll ever be 100% conclusively proved. But it's certainly a lot more likely than the idea of there being UFOs flying around the skies of Rennes-le-Château.